This is Emily Channell-Justice, the director of the Temerty Contemporary Ukraine Program at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. This is TCUP Briefs, where I discuss the main takeaways of an important event or paper that has come out recently. Today, I want to discuss an article from Notes from Poland by Szymon Piwczyk that addresses the question of how many Ukrainian refugees are there really in Poland. This question is important because figures about the sheer number of refugees are regularly being cited in the press and in academic publications. Currently, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs counts the number of refugee arrivals from Ukraine since February 24th at 7 million people, although there has been a dramatic decline in the number of arrivals since the end of May. The UN OCHA also counts nearly 3.7 million Ukrainians in Poland. When the war first began, some experts were stressing that the main problem with counting movement was with internally displaced people, so people who never crossed the border to leave Ukraine. A lot of those people couldn't or didn't register with displaced status, so it made it difficult to know precisely how many people were internally displaced, and that continues to be a problem. Many people concluded, however, that counting refugees was easier because you could simply count border crossings. Now, over 3 months into the war, we have to remember that this is a border, so crossing it can mean many things. The article in Notes from Poland points out that every single crossing was counted to get to that number of 3.7 million people. That can include not only refugees, but also humanitarian aid workers who are counting as a crossing every time they go to and from Ukraine. This also includes things like the heads of the Polish government or other leaders who crossed a particular border into Ukraine and then left again. It's also important to note that some days more Ukrainians are returning to Ukraine than entering Poland at all. So there has been a dramatic shift in the huge numbers of refugees that were coming into Poland at the beginning of the war. Furthermore, many Ukrainians go to Poland and then leave for other countries. Ukrainian refugees up until now have been able to access free transportation from Warsaw and into other parts of Europe since the war began. The author of the Notes from Poland article argues that a better way to assess the number of refugees in Poland is through the Polish National Identification Number, or PESEL. Ukrainians were allowed to register for a PESEL number and a special status as Ukrainian refugees to aid their integration into Poland because it allowed them to work and allowed their children to go to school. As of April 25th, over 1 million Ukrainians had registered for a PESEL, and the vast majority, unsurprisingly, were women between the ages of 18 and 65 and children. In some ways, the number of Ukrainians registering for a PESEL could be a more accurate measure, but we also have to keep in mind that many people are returning. So it's possible that people actively decided not to register for a PESEL because they never intended to stay in Poland for very long. We can guess that the people who registered for a PESEL are more likely to stay in Poland. They are not likely to move on to other parts of Europe, and potentially they are unlikely to return to Ukraine as well. So what happens with the other 2.7 million people in Poland who did not register for a PESEL number? Well, we're not really sure, and that makes the distribution of aid very difficult. We can't be sure if they've settled somewhere else in Europe or if they've returned to Ukraine. And that's what makes humanitarian need so difficult to assess. Needs are constantly shifting. The number of people who need a certain thing is constantly shifting, and what those people need is also constantly shifting. There's been a shifting response from the Polish government as well. Whereas on the one hand, the Polish government decided not to open refugee camps in order to help people better integrate into Polish society, now it's difficult to know how long the Polish government can sustain this large number of Ukrainian refugees. The Polish government may certainly start to encourage people to return home as soon as they can. Unfortunately, as long as the war goes on, there will still be people who need to get to safety and who will probably continue to come to Poland. It's important to keep in mind that we need to constantly reassess the questions about refugees as well as internally displaced people. Their needs are constantly shifting, and the response from the Ukrainian and the Polish government, as well as the governments that are receiving large numbers of refugees around Ukraine, is important to keep in mind. Thanks so much for tuning in.